we may be seated. I'd like to call on Rachel Braun at this time.
It's been 3 days since Bob died, and we're all still in a state of shock. We can't believe that we are here and that Bob's here. There seems to be no words to describe the depth of our grief and pain. And yet, in the funeral service we're about to begin, and in the days that follow at Shiva and beyond, we'll try to find words to talk about Bob's life and the impact it had on Nahila, Neshama, Renana, Paul, and Sue in the brief life of his son Rashi and on all of us. Bob was a master of words and a gifted storyteller. He used words to tell stories that touched us, and he taught and enabled asylum seekers to tell their own stories, even, or perhaps especially, when their stories seem too painful to express in words. A story about Bob that means a lot to me is remembering how Bob used to take walks with Saul Jacobson when Saul's wife Lisa and later their son Ben were ill. That was an act of deep love and loyalty. I adopted Bob's example when a friend of mine suffered a huge loss in her family. She and I took weekly walks for years, and it helped both of us to summon the courage to keep going. So now, as we hear and tell stories about Bob, let's all listen carefully to find one that means a great deal to us, and try to make Bob's work part of our own stories. With that, we'll keep Bob's memory alive in the world, and even more so, we'll keep Bob's way of being alive in the world. After Lisa died, our fellow Farbrengener, Norma Brooks, wrote a melody in her memory from Psalm 24, verses 3 to 5, that described the life of someone who is a good and righteous person. That is an appropriate melody to sing for Bob, too. Who will ascend the mountain of the Lord? And who will stand in God's holy place? One with clean hands and a pure heart, who has never spoken falsely, nor sworn a deceitful oath. That one will receive a blessing from the Lord and righteousness from a rescuing God. Please sing it with me if you know it, or hum. Tell me who will ascend the mountain of the Lord, and who will sing and rejoice in God's holy place. Those clean of hands and pure of heart, who honor God's holy name. In truth they do testify and never take an oath in vain. Oh yes, they'll gain a blessing from God, a blessing from God, a just reward from Adonai, a sign from above. Oh yes, קודשו, נקי כפיים ובר לבב, אשר לא נסע לשווא נפשי ולא נשבע למרמה. Adonai, me'et Adonai, u'tzedakah Elohei Yisho, Yisa v'racha, me'et Adonai, me'et Adonai, u'tzedakah
Psalm 90. Tefillah LaMoshe ish ha'Elohim, Adonai ma'on ata hayita lanu b'dor v'dor, b'terem harim yuladu v'techolel eretz v'tevel, u'me'olam ad olam ata el. O God, you have been our refuge from generation to generation. Before the mountains were born and the earth was fashioned, you are everlasting. But human beings you crumble to the dust, and 1,000 years are in your sight as a passing day or an hour of night. In the morning we sprout afresh, by nightfall we fade and wither. Like grass we flourish for a day, but then you sweep us away, and we sleep. Your wrath darkens our days, our lives expire like a sigh. 70 our years may number, 80 only if granted the vigor. Laden with trouble and travail, life quickly passes and flies away. Limnot yameinu kein hoda, teach us to number our days, that we may attain a heart of wisdom, and match days of sorrow with days of joy, equal to the years we have suffered. Yihinom Adonai Eloheinu aleinu u'masei yadeinu konana aleinu u'masei yadeinu konaneu. May the favor of the Lord be upon us. May the Holy One establish the work of our hands. May God firmly establish the work of our hands. We are here gathered to mourn and to share words of reminiscence and of recollection in memory of Robert or Bob Benjamin Rovinsky, Binyamin ben Moshe v'Sarah. Robert is survived by his wife Renana, by his daughters Neshama and Neila, by his brother Paul and sister-in-law Paula, his sister Sue and brother-in-law Gary, his nieces and nephews and grandnieces and nephews, and by many other relatives and friends, former colleagues, fellow congregants, and many, many others. People who encountered Bob in any of a number of ways and whose lives were changed for the better as a result. My name is Carl Perkins. I am one of Robert's many relatives. My mother and Robert's father were sister and brother, and his paternal grandparents were my maternal grandparents, although I never called them that. They were Bubby and Zadie to me as to him, and to the rest of the cousins as well. They were very sweet and kindly people who came to this country as immigrants in the first decade of the 20th century. They worked hard raised 5 children, and they were wonderful, caring grandparents. Bob's father was quiet and kindly, and his mother was fiercely principled and incredibly hospitable. If there was a word that could describe their home, it was the word chesed. And in many respects, they embodied that value that we associate with Avraham Avinu, with Abraham the patriarch. Their home was patuach lirvacha, open to all. And one always felt comfortable visiting and being there. And by the way, they reached out to people of all nationalities, backgrounds, races, religious identities. It made absolutely no difference to them or to Bob growing up in that home. And those who knew and know Bob can certainly attest to that. So I've known Bob all my life. Among my earliest memories is sitting next to him at his bar mitzvah. I was 5 at the time. And then I remember him having an aliyah while I was reading Torah at my bar mitzvah, only 8 years later. There was always something about Robert, and we referred to him as Robert. I know some call him Bob, and I've come to refer to him with both of those names. He had this way of forming a deep relationship, and I think the reason was that he was always interested, honestly interested, deeply interested in whatever it was that you were talking about. There was always a warmth and a smile. Bob was never haughty, never opinionated or judgmental, though he had opinions. He was genial, congenial, and kind. It was a source of real enrichment in my own life to have had a relationship with him, first as a younger cousin during my youth, and then as adults later in life. Bob was a real center of gravity in the extended family. He always cared about family, and he demonstrated that caring. He and Paul were like a 2-person genealogical research society. Not long ago, Robert traveled to Ukraine with a group led by Rabbi Hertzfeld from this very synagogue, among other reasons, to visit the town where our grandfather, our Zaidi, had come from. And doing a little bit of speculation, he came to the conclusion that Shalom Aleichem had passed through the town around the time our grandfather was born, so undoubtedly he must have been the sandik at our grandfather's birth and bris. We never got documentation of that, but Shalom Aleichem would have approved. Robert was always kind. After my mother, his blood aunt, died, Bob remained close to our family. And after my father remarried, he befriended my stepmother. He was accepting. He was forgiving. He was always seeing the positive in people. He was always looking at people around him, besever panim yafot, as we're taught in Pirkei Avot. Always giving people the benefit of the doubt, always trying to understand what is the strength in this person, what's the beauty in this person that needs to come out and be expressed. You know, my own wife has actually known Robert for almost 40 years, and we suddenly realized that just not too long ago. And she wrote the following, thinking about her relationship with Bob. She said it always felt good to see him. His warm smile always opened up her heart. His embrace of the moment made every moment special. She admired his intelligence, his openness to new experiences and ways of doing things, his talent as a storyteller, which we see all over, his devotion to his family, the way he put others at ease. You know, we also learn in Pirkei Avot, with whom is God pleased? The one who other human beings are pleased with. If other human beings can stand to be around a person, God probably feels the same way. And of course, he used his time in such meaningful and creative ways. He shared life's happenings with all. And she, for one, and I'm sure she's not alone, was grateful for all of those moments. It's to me a sad but meaningful coincidence that Bob died during the week that we read the very first chapters of Genesis in the Bible, during which we read that all of us are descended from one human being, Adam, who was created in the image of God, which means, of course, that we're all brothers and sisters, and all of us have within us a spark of the divine. In his own straightforward, non-dramatic way, Bob understood this, and he lived his life in accordance with that principle. He was certainly a proud Jew, and he delved deeply into Jewish culture and Jewish learning, and he made it available to many, many people through his work in the academy in which so many classes were offered in Judaism. But to him, that was thoroughly consistent with and utterly harmonious with loving all human beings, wherever they happened to come from. He just was a naturally loving human being. He also was, of course, an extremely bright one. I'm sure that virtually all of us know people who are very good in math. And we all probably know people who are really articulate and eloquent and who know poetry. We don't know very many who are good at both. But Bob was, of course, one of them. Bob's parents were married on August 5th, 1945. The next day, a bomb was dropped in Japan, and within shortly over a week, the war in the Pacific was over. 1 year later, Robert was born on August 25th, 1946. Soon his brother Paul and then his sister Sue came along. Robert attended Central High School in Philadelphia and then was awarded a Mayor's Scholarship, a full paid scholarship to the University of Pennsylvania, which he attended between 1964 and 1968. After getting his bachelor's degree, he went to Cornell to study math, eventually getting his PhD in operations research. His research involved the economic impact of decreasing the use of insecticides on cotton and corn. It's no surprise that he very quickly got a job with the Department of Agriculture and soon found himself traveling all over the world, consulting with other nations. He then worked for a time as the Chief Information Officer of Fairfax County, Virginia, and then he moved over to the FAA. Now, how did he move over to the FAA? Well, he happened to fall into a conversation with Joseph Del Bazzo, a top official at the FAA, on an airplane ride. By the end of the airplane ride, I'm surprised it took the end of the airplane ride, Joseph Del Bazzo came to the conclusion that he was so impressed with Bob that he directed the operations research group to hire Bob sight unseen, just to go ahead and hire him. After Bob had already moved to the Washington area, he happened to attend a storytelling conference that Renana also attended. It happened to be his birthday. He happened to be outside, standing in a field. On the other side of the field was Renana. She started to walk toward him, but then an obstacle appeared, a pool of water in between them. He took off his jacket, threw it onto the puddle, and Renana stepped across to the rest of her life. Now, I've heard different versions of that story over the years, but I'm continually in awe of it. I'm reminded, and by the way, it's not just me speaking, it's based on something Robert himself once told me. I'm reminded of another story in the Bible, this one involving the patriarch Isaac, the son of Abraham. Abraham had sent his servant to find a wife for Isaac, and while the servant is on his way back with the wife, Isaac goes out walking in the field in the late afternoon. Lasuach basadeh. Looking up, he sees camels approaching. On one of those camels is Rebekah, his intended, as we'll see, whom Abraham's servant was bringing back to meet him. She raises her eyes, she sees Isaac, and she quickly gets off of the camel and asks the servant, "Who is that man walking in the field toward us?" And the servant says, "That is my master." So she takes her veil and covers herself. And then Isaac brought her into the tent of his mother Sarah, and he took Rebekah as his wife, and Isaac, we are told, loved her. That's the story in the Bible, or I should say that's the story as it was told through Bob's consciousness. Well, Robert's Hebrew name was not Isaac, and Renana's is not Rebekah, but Bob certainly fell in love with Renana that day, and he remained in love with her to her dying day. The two of them had 3 children, a son, Jonah Rashi, who died less than 1 week after his birth, and their beloved daughters, Neshama and Ne'ilah. It's really hard to imagine Bob being more proud of Neshama and Ne'ilah. I can't think of a conversation I had with him in the last 20 years when he wasn't sharing his nachas, his nachat ruach, in how they were developing. They and Renana lit up his life. We're going to hear today from members of Bob's family and also from several friends. First, to share perspectives on Bob's PR life, that is to say, pre-Renana, I'd like to call on Larry Etzweiler to come forward.
Thank you.
Sure.
I'm Larry Etzwaller. I've known Bob since 1968 when we were both, should I get closer? When we were both graduate students at Cornell. Renana asked me to speak just 5 minutes about life before he got married. That's a tall order. I'm going to start my stopwatch, so I try not to go over. And come on, start up. Okay. When I think of Bob, I first of all think of a person who does good deeds. And I could give you so many examples, but I'll give you 3 from Cornell. First of all, suicide prevention. As soon as the city established a suicide prevention hotline, Bob was there, he was volunteering. Later, he took courses on training and he trained staff to work with suicide prevention. He was very concerned about people having difficulties. Second, Bob's involvement with the Cornell United Religious Works. He was a frequent visitor to Annabelle Taylor Hall, which is where Cornell United Religious Works was stationed. He came not only for Jewish functions, but also to engage in interfaith dialogue. He befriended several pastors. He befriended Dan Berrigan, who at that time was the faculty advisor. And when Dan was able to find a conference hall where they could set up a draft counseling service, Bob jumped into that role with gusto. I think he, on the Cornell campus, may have been most famous as the person who knew most about the Selective Service Law. Third, support for gay rights. At least 2 years before Stonewall, and I think much earlier than that, Bob was very much a supporter of gay rights. He had many gay friends. At Cornell, he reached out to the Student Homophile League. He invited members to come and talk to organizations that he was involved with. He invited members to come and help with suicide prevention. Now, I don't want to leave the impression that Bob was only a do-gooder. He also knew how to have a good time. Again, 3 examples. Folk dancing. He loved to folk dance. He started in high school. He continued all his life. Just about 2 months ago, he and his good friend Gary Rader stayed at my place so that in New Jersey so that they could attend a folk dance festival at Princeton. And so far as I know, the only time Bob was ever arrested, although not convicted, was for running an unruly house that he rented in West Philadelphia where he had a folk dance party. Second, Bob loved to play chess. He was an excellent chess player. Do I have time? I'll try. I had a good high school friend named Martin Budd, who was famous at Penn State for being the best chess player that they had for years. Among Martin's other talents, he could put a blindfold on and beat my father playing chess. My father was very irritated by that. So when Bob came to visit my parents, which he did many times, I arranged a chess game between Bob and Martin, and I was expecting a very competitive game. Bob prevailed in 10 minutes. I'd never seen Martin struggle so much. I was incredibly impressed. My father was amazed. Third, oh boy, how do I get into this? Women. Bob enjoyed the company of women. He befriended and charmed women. Renata will not be surprised when I tell you that Bob had a few girlfriends before he met Renata. I never understood how he did it. I think part of it was psychology. He knew how to make people comfortable, and that is very important when you're speaking with women. Part of it, I think, was game theory. I don't know if you've ever seen do you remember the movie A Beautiful Mind, where John Mash uses game theory to optimize the probability that he and his colleagues would each have dates? Bob used game theory to maximize his probability of getting a date with women. Just a little bit. In 1972, I moved to the Philadelphia area where Bob's parents and his siblings adopted me. I discovered they were just as nice and indecent as he was. A short story. One time I went to his home. I went to his parents' home. His father had given me a key to get in because I was going to get there late. And the next morning we were going to go off and do something. I couldn't get the darn key I'm now over time. I couldn't get the darn key to open the door. Across the street, his friends, Mr. and Mrs. Black, saw me trying to burglarize this house, asked me what I was doing, and I explained it. So they invited me into their home. They let me sleep in the bedroom of their son, who was away at college. They fed me breakfast the next morning before I went over to see the Rovinskys. And I said, "You folks are being incredibly nice to a stranger." And their response was, "Well, Sarah and Morris are the nicest and most decent people we know, so it's always a pleasure to be decent and nice to a friend of theirs." And that describes Bob and the whole family. He was very nice and he was very decent. Thank you.
I'd like to call now on Bob's brother Paul and his daughter Neshama to share some reflections on the role of family in Bob's life and how he shared his love.
Wow, what a great crowd. I'd like to begin by thanking all those who helped our family during this difficult time, with special thanks to Rabbi Gila Langner and our cousin, Rabbi Carl Perkins. My brother grew up in a home where there wasn't much money, but there was an abundance of love. Our parents made it very clear to us at a very young age that if you wanted money, you had to work very hard for it. And getting a college education wasn't an option. It was not optional. However, their most important lessons, which they transmitted through stories, and they told us with their very visible actions, were honoring parents, caring for family, and the importance of friendships. My sister Sue and I were fortunate. We've been recipients of Bob's love, caring, and friendship our whole lives. He and I shared a room until he went to the University of Pennsylvania. We worked together on our paper route, taking recyclables to the junkyard in our radio flyer wagon. We used to call it trash picking, shoveling snow, and carrying groceries home for shoppers. Sure, we fought at times. We fiercely competed, both across the chess table and for our mother's attention. But we were partners in the nightly pinochle game against our dad and Sue. We were teammates on the state championship high school chess team the entire time we went to Central High School, which Carlo went to. We were co-collectors of stamps, coins, baseball cards, and our Archie comic book collection. Even at a very young age, my brother showed his love for me. He knew that I would be the class clown and he would be the serious student at school. So on his first day at kindergarten, he bit the teacher, so I wouldn't look so bad in comparison. In college, Sue reciprocated the love that Bob gave her by helping him and his roommates with home-cooked meals and a healthy dose of his sister's love and affection. And when he was in graduate school, I could not pass statistics, so he tutored me for 2 long weekends. And I passed statistics, I got my business degree, and later got my CPA license, thanks to him. After Robert married Renana and had a family, how he related to us changed, took on new dimensions. Our Bubby and Zadie had inspired us, each of us and our cousins, to incorporate Judaism into our life, but each in our own way. Thanks to Renana, Bob got an extra dose of spiritual inspiration. He then shared his special brand of Ahavat Yisroel, a love of his fellow Jew, not only with Renana and his daughters, but with his extended family, through his teaching, his storytelling, leading seders, Shabbat dinners, and his specialty, officiating at family weddings. A special memory of mine is 45 years ago. On the night of our official wedding, we had a hippie wedding the night before for friends, which Bob officiated. The description of how he showed his love for family wouldn't be complete without how he incorporated good-natured humor into our lives. He thought he was a lot funnier than he really was. It actually runs in the family. One of my fondest memories was when he and I played a trick on Neela during a game of pinochle. She made the mistake of going to the bathroom. So we, while she was away, arranged the cards so she had the ideal pinochle hand, a double flush and double aces, probably 1 in 10 million. She came back and she started opening her cards, and her eyes were getting wider and wider, and her smile was getting bigger and bigger. After we bid, she laid down her hands, beaming with pride that she had won. Unfortunately, later she learned it was our trickery. Another role he played in our family was the safety net and trusted counselor. He extended himself to help us with job assistance, health issues, emotional counsel, and financial support. There was never anything he expected in return. I will share two very personal examples of many. During my long recovery from esophageal cancer surgery, Bob and Renana hired a private duty nurse to spend the nights with me, 11 nights in a hospital. And let me tell you, it saved my life. The other thing that I'll never forget was the night our father died. He, I, and my mother, my sister couldn't make it in time, were with him in the hospital, Abington Hospital, right near my cousin. And it was really getting late. And my mother was exhausted. I was exhausted. Robert said, "Go home. Take care of Mom." He spent the whole night with our dad, holding his hand, saying prayers, and telling him how much he meant to us. I'll never forget that. Robert's action in caring and loving our mother was exemplary. He was an integral part of our family care team that helped her reach 100. Robert spoke so beautifully at her 100th birthday party, and 3 weeks later, he gave the eulogy at her funeral. We always called Mom Saint Sarah. I think Robert has also earned the saint title for the way he led his life, shared his love with family, friends, and the less fortunate. He will be sorely missed by all of us, but he leaves a legacy of good deeds that will inspire all he knew. I want to conclude by sharing with you the last conversations and emails that we had right before his heart attack. He was exceptionally proud of where each of his daughters were at this time in his life. He felt like he and Renana had reached a new level of closeness and teamwork. He said that this was one of the happiest times of his entire life. This is my final email to my brother. You spoke so beautifully. I'm proud to be your little brother, who has looked up to you my whole life for spiritual inspiration, brotherly love, and unwavering friendship.
Okay, first off, can you guys hear me? Yes? Okay.
Raise this up so that people can hear. Try to get closer to the mic.
Hello? Yes? Okay. Hello. Thank you all for coming and your messages, love, and support during this time. It means more to me and my family than you'll ever know. My uncle and I wanted to share how we knew my papa's love. He expressed love with high fives, forehead kisses, snuggles, and warm hugs. In millennial speak, his love language was physical touch and quality time. However, I also knew his love through storytelling. We shared a love of great literature, Jewish folklore, fairy tales, and the tales from around the world. He taught me about identity and family by telling his personal memories and family stories. He taught me respect and empathy by listening to and retelling the stories of others, specifically those who typically didn't have a voice. It amazed me that it was even possible that someone else's stories, that someone else's words could describe my own thoughts and feelings. Gertrudis Gomez de Avianca, a Cuban writer from the 1840s, wrote about the memory of her late father. And I was struck by how closely the words resembled my father and how I saw him. And I'm going to read that now. I was also able to share these words with my father while he was alive, and so they have a special sort of importance to me. Soon it will have been 16 years since he died, but I am very, very sure that his memory lives on in Puerto Principe and that his name is never uttered without praise and benedictions. He did no harm to anyone and did all the good he could. In his public and his private life, he was always the same: noble, intrepid, truthful, generous, and incorruptible. Forgive me these praises. They are a tribute I must bring to my progenitors, and when I recount the qualities which made my father so esteemed, I feel a definite pride in being able to say, I am his daughter. Thank you.
I'd like to call on Michael Tabor at this time. If you need more mic, I can try to extend it.
Well, just tell me if you hear me. Thank you, Renata. This is an honor. It wasn't that long ago that I actually saw Bob in addition to our High Holy Day service. He came to our farm stand in Adams Morgan to pick up apples, where he was about to go on to the New York Avenue Presbyterian Church, where we have our services, where Farbrengen has its services, to explain the high holidays, especially Yom Kippur, and offer them the same apples that we use to break our fast. So my wife's instructions, and I always listen to my wife, was to stick to the script. So rather than speaking strictly from my heart, I'll stick to the script. So ever since Renata asked me to speak at this funeral, I've been pondering the question of who Bob Rovinsky really was. And I've come to the conclusion that he and other Farbrengen members who have recently died were not from this planet. That they were in fact Menschlikites, not ordinary humans. I knew Bob first, about 40 years ago, as a member of a dance group. How impossible, Jewish men being members of a dance group back then. The Dancing Dybbaks, I think was the name of it. And I think it was inspired partially by Bob, but also inspired by an early Farbrengenite, Liz Lehrman. Quiet, modest, personal, warm, comforting, and engaging, along with a strong sense of social justice and tzedakah, somehow even in troubled times, making the world right and keeping it balanced. Bob undoubtedly was from a different time and place. Approximately 10 years ago, when there was an opening in our men's group, a Jewish men's group, who've been meeting for about 25 years, 8 to 10 Jewish men who met every other Sunday night, we asked Bob to join us. The group was based on the beliefs of mythopoetic poet Robert Bly, who advocated brotherly interaction between men. Came very easy for Bob, stressing awareness of our mutual grief, failures, and successes, with discussion of sports and politics generally being off limits. We'll see what happens tonight. In other words, behaving more like what comes much more naturally to women when they talk amongst themselves. When Bob joined the group, he fit in like an old shoe. Now, I consider myself an advocate of societal change and social justice. In fact, our daughter, who just came down from New York, brought me my AOC shirt that she gave me yesterday. But Bob, in his modest, softly engaging mode, was able to revolutionize a room, a group, or a spiritual entity by his presence and leadership. Never expecting thanks or repayment, he and Renana opened their arms and hearts and home and gave you access to all of his warmth and sense of peace and inner strength. Mild-mannered and kind, Robert was our Clark Kent, our visitor from another place, who allowed those of us in his community brief access to his brilliance and openness. He shined bright for all of us, for too short a time, much too short. Thank you.
I'd like to call on Rhonda Weiss to lead us in the 23rd Psalm.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rhonda Weiss. I'm deeply honored to be asked to lead everyone in the 23rd Song, Mizmor LeDavid. I'd like to just refer to the line in the psalm that always moves me so deeply. Ta'aroch lefanai shulchan neged sorarai. I prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Dishanta b'Hashem en roshi. I anoint my head with oil. Kosi rivaya. My cup overflows. Bob's cup overflowed with the optimism and support and chesed that he shared in the world. And of course, as our cups feel diminished with his loss, we hope that as time goes on, we will find the strength to fill it with Bob's memories and the acts of chesed that he performed in the world. Please join. Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai Ratzar, Imotesha Yar B'Tzini, Al Mei Menuchot Yenachaleni, Nafshi Eshuvah, Nafshi Eshuvah, Yadvini V'lav Le'tzedek L'man Shemo, Gam Ki Shanta
I'd like now to call on John and Bracha Laster to lead us in Birkat Kohanim.
We've been asked to facilitate the priestly blessing. It's customary in Farbrengen and in many other congregations to sit in the round and to invite everyone to assume the responsibility of blessing others. Bob, who officiated at many life cycle events, who continually acted as an exemplary chaplain to those in need, who led services and taught us through the Torah study, embodied the concept of relationships in a Havarah, in an egalitarian community rather than a hierarchical one. May you feel the ripple effects of Bob's many acts of kindness, teaching, and leadership as we invite you all together to recite the 3 priestly blessings.
Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha, Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'yichoneka, Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. Okay, go.
This past August 25th, on his birthday, Bob posted the following. Today is my birthday. I am so fortunate to have my health, even if some faculties are impaired and some areas need improvement. I am so grateful to have a loving, intelligent, and active, inspiring wife, 2 delightful and growing daughters, my best friend and brother Paul, my sister Sue, and a large and loving set of in-laws and cousins and kids and grandkids. I am blessed with my congregation Farbrengen, possibly the best Jewish community that has inspired and supported me for so many, many years. And my other communities of storytellers, dancers, other Jewish congregations, political activists. I have my supportive men's group. I have held wonderful jobs that rarely felt like work. I've been so happy to be able to practice my passion for teaching. And while I fully believe that man tracht und Gott lacht, that man plans and God laughs, I'm looking forward to performing this weekend as a storyteller, to more teaching and consulting, to another set of hikes with my friend Richard, to coaching my asylum seekers, to exploring ways to reverse our suicidal path to environmental destruction, to helping to lead high holiday services and giving talks on the weekly Torah portions, to travel, to helping my wife and my daughters, to visiting old friends and family. I am so thankful to so many lifetime friends who have helped and loved me, and I regret every hurt I imposed upon any of them. It's hard to think of a better preparation for the high holidays than that kind of a posting. And indeed, the high holidays were a time which Robert took very, very seriously. This year, he, and Neshama, and Renana, and Sasha took part, as I was told, took part in leading the Avodah service, the service that reminds us of the ancient days when the priests would actually themselves go through rituals which would bring cleansing and atonement to the entire people. The next day or the day after Yom Kippur, he ran into a mutual friend who told me that he was so excited, feeling so good. And then came that Shabbat when he was stricken. When the news spread, it's no surprise that it was a shock. It also brought such sadness and such pain. People have spoken eloquently today about how nice a person, how generous a person Bob was, to anyone and to everyone. One of our speakers used a word that one of the obituaries used to describe Bob and the hold he had on our consciousness. It called him a mensch. Now, the word mensch is a Yiddish word that refers to someone who behaves in a kind, generous, wholehearted manner without any hope or expectation of a reward. He or she is a nice person because that's the kind of person they are. That's the kind of person Bob was. What does it feel like when such a person departs from our midst? In the middle of chapter 28 of the book of Genesis, the book of Bereshit, the Bible tells us that the third of our patriarchs, we've spoken about Abraham, we've spoken about Yitzchak, now we're speaking about Yaakov, Jacob. We're told that Jacob left Beersheba and headed toward the city of Haran. Vayetze Yaakov mi Beersheba vayelech Harana. The great Jewish commentator Rashi, basing himself on earlier texts, asks a reasonable question. At this point in the biblical narrative, we know that Jacob is in Beersheba. So why does the Bible tell us, Vayetze Yaakov mi Beersheba? Why does it tell us that he left Beersheba and headed off to Haran? We already know he's in Beersheba. The Torah should have said he left for Haran. It doesn't have to tell us that he left Beersheba. Why does it do that? The answer that Rashi gives us makes a lot of sense. When the Bible tells us that our patriarch Jacob left Beersheba, it's not to teach us about Yaakov. It's not to teach us about Jacob. It's to teach us about Beersheba. It's to teach us when a righteous person leaves a place, it makes an impression. As long as a righteous person is in a place, he or she is its glory, its splendor, its beauty. When he leaves it, some of its glory, some of its splendor, and some of its beauty depart as well. The various communities of which Bob was a part, and we know what communities those are, they're colder now. They're less vibrant, less joyful, less amused and bemused. I can't think of a better way to honor Bob's memory than for us to aspire to be the kind of mensch that he was. Let's each of us try in our own way to be a little nicer, a little more generous, a little more accepting, a little more caring than we have been until now. We need to do that, and our communities need us to do that. Let's make of his memory a blessing in all of the communities in which we live, by each of us being a blessing in the world. I'd like to close with a poem by Ralph Waldo Emerson that Bob posted on October 9th, just a few weeks ago. Some of us follow him on Facebook, and for those who've seen it, I apologize. For those who haven't, it's a blessing. Write it on your heart that every day is the best day in the year. He is rich who owns the day, And no one owns the day who allows it to be invaded with fret and anxiety. Finish every day and be done with it. You have done what you could. Some blunders, some absurdities have no doubt crept in. Forget them as soon as you can. Tomorrow is a new day. Begin it well and serenely, with too high a spirit to be cumbered with your old nonsense. This new day is too dear, with its hopes and invitations, to waste a moment on the yesterdays. Yehi Zichro Baruch. May the soul of Robert Benjamin Rovinsky, Binyamin ben Moshe V'Sara, remain bound up in the bonds of life. May he rest in peace, and let us all say, Amen. At this time, let's rise for the closing prayer, the El Malei Rachamim. I would like to invite up Steve Marcus at this time.
El Malei Rachamim, Shochen Bamromim, Ametzei Menucha Nechona, Taga Kanfei Ashkina, B'malot Kedoshim U'Tohorim, Kezohar Harakia Masirim, Lenishmat Binyamin ben Moshe V'Sara, Shehalach li'olamo, V'gan Eden tehei menuchato, Ana Bal harachamim, Hastireu b'seiter knafecha le'olamim, V'yitzror achayim et nishmato, Adonai hu nachalato, Ve'anuach b'shalom amishkavo, Ve'nomar Amen.
O Lord, who is exalted and yet full of compassion, grant perfect peace in your sheltering presence to the soul of Robert Benjamin Rovinsky, Binyamin ben Moshe V'Sara, who has gone to his eternal home. Master of mercy, we beseech you to remember the worthy and the righteous deeds that he performed in the land of the living. The Lord is now his portion. May he rest in peace, and let us all say, Amen. At this time, I would like to call on those who will be leading us in a nigun entitled Shalom. Those are Sasha Olenek, Dale Lupu, and Richard Gladstein. Also, the pallbearers who served earlier, I would ask that they step to the side entrance here to assist in accompanying the casket from the room. Please note that if they are needed, there will be umbrellas, tents, and seats at the King David Memorial Garden, where interment will take place subsequently. Shiva hours, the family will observe Shiva at the late residence through Thursday, daily from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m., and each evening with minyan at 7:30 p.m.
Shalom. Shalom.